Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. We are recording today's webinar to talk about the Mass Fresh grant. This is an information session for schools and districts to cover the K through 12 audience. And I am delighted to be joined today by my colleague Maggie Nowak with the Office of Food and Nutrition Programs at DESE, and she is the local food systems specialist. My name's Abby Getman-Skillicorn. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Special Projects Manager for Massachusetts Farm to School. And we're delighted to have the Mass Fresh grant available again this year. So we'll be going through what it is that, what is Farm to School, talk about the Mass Fresh funding overview and the eligibility, the application review. Maggie will be getting into some of the nitty gritty of what things look like and different sections of the grant in GEMS, as well as cover different resources that you have available to you and questions as you have them. So housekeeping elements, as Maggie said earlier, please type your questions into the Q&A function as you have them. We will get to them towards the end of today's presentation. This session is being recorded, so you will be able to access both the recording and the slides later after today's webinar. And thanks for being with us. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Massachusetts Farm to School is a statewide organization that works to strengthen farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing local foods and purchasing and education at schools. And we get involved through professional learning opportunities, networking, policy, and advocacy. We are one of the organizations behind the Massachusetts Feeding Kids Coalition that has been supporting getting Mass Fresh funding over the past number of years. And we work on a variety of communications, including our Harvest of the Month program that helps both school food service programs promote what they're serving that's local in the cafeteria throughout the course of the year, as well as educational resources for educators to talk about what's local in different times of the year. And those kinds of conversations and educational opportunities aren't limited to just science or math. We have a budding array of educational resources for ELA and social sciences and other things. And we are also the contracted outreach provider with DESE on both the Mass Fresh grant and the Northeast Food for Schools grant. So for those of you who are new to Farm to School, we generally like to talk about the 3 C's of Farm to School, which really mean classroom, cafeteria, and community. Farm to School takes up a variety of different, or it manifests in a variety of different ways. So, providing hands-on educational experiences for students in the classroom or maybe in their school garden. We love to have students experience Farm to School by the offerings that they're able to enjoy in their school meal programs and in the community, which means, engaging with outside partners, community partners, and the local community and economy, because here in Massachusetts, we know we have a rich legacy of agriculture, and it is certainly a spirit in a lot of communities. And lifting up the food access and ability for folks to celebrate over strawberry June harvests or apple picking in the fall is something we want to be available to all students, no matter their zip code. So for the Mass Fresh grant program, which is what you're here today to learn a little bit more about. So Mass Fresh stands for Farming Reinforces Education and Student Health. It's a statewide grant program for school and early education programs, and it's administered by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Office of Food and Nutrition Programs. And this year, we anticipate there's about $500,000 that will be available with awards of up to $30,000 per applicant. New this year is that project activities must be completed by June 30th of 2025. So that's, this upcoming June. All grant activities need to be completed by then, and the funding cannot be used to continue any existing activities. So if you're planning to apply for the Farm to School for this Mass Fresh grant, your role or your job in your application is to really demonstrate how funds will be utilized to initiate or expand Farm to School activities if you already have some Farm to School activities happening in your school communities. Shout out to ABC Head Start, who did a planting day this past June in Dorchester. And those are some of the students who got a new school garden at their Head Start, thanks to Mass Fresh funds. So for eligibility, we hope most of you who are attending today are programs or schools that provide the National School Lunch Program. The applying body must be a sponsor of either the National School Lunch Program or the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, so the CACFP program. And CACFP sponsors must be licensed early education programs. Please know, if you are a school district that offers both NSLP and CACFP, you are limited to only one Mass Fresh application. So keep your eye on those activities. For school districts, we are really looking for activities that are serving your kindergarten through 12th grade students. And the photo that's pictured here is our students at English High School in Boston who were harvesting produce with Green City Growers staff this past June, thanks to the Mass Fresh grant. We have a number of Mass Fresh grantees from the past 2 fiscal years that really are covering across the state. We hope that you feel that the Mass Fresh grant is accessible to your school programs and your students. And we're really excited to see the geographic diversity that the Mass Fresh grant has been able to have in more rural areas and certainly in our urban centers. For the grant award tracks in Mass Fresh, you can apply for funds between $5,000 and $30,000 in the following categories. So new farm to school initiatives in your K-12 programs, which means you really don't have anything related to farm to school going on. No school gardens. You're not really doing local menu offerings in the cafeterias. Not sure what's happening. If there are concerted classroom activities or threads that are happening in the educational sphere in your school, or there could be expanded farm to school initiatives. Maybe you have, a couple of grades that take field trips, at one time of the year, but there's nothing happening as far as a school garden or on-site growing, or feeling like there's a connection to what might be happening in the school cafeteria. The expanding K-12 Farm to School Initiative grant is really for programs that have at least started something related to farm to school, but don't have a concerted effort in the 3 C's. And so, as you can see, Dr. Perkins School had a farmer presentation and a farmers market stand for their students in this past school year, where they had Still Life Farm come and present about a day in the life on the farm, and then have students go through a mock farmers market stand where they could select fruits and vegetables that they wanted to be able to choose. And what's exciting about Dr. Perkins School is that they're also they're a day program and a residential program. And so it was really eye-opening for a lot of the students, getting to know about some of the, one of the farms in their area, and kind of getting students excited about trying some new foods as well. So following this theme, as far as if you consider yourself a new farm to school grant track, you should really, this is a program that is not really engaged in all of the 3 C's. Maybe you're engaged in none, or maybe just one. So again, like I said, maybe, some classes taking a field trip, but there's not a lot of collaboration happening between the 3 different C's. You can apply as a new program. And if you do have some activities that are happening across the 3 C's, but really trying to bolster and strengthen the efforts that you're making in your school community, apply under the expanding application. So some of the eligible activities that schools can do, that's really designed to either start up or expand your offerings, including building a school garden or an indoor growing operation for students, developing classroom curriculums, lesson plans that support food literacy efforts, including maybe purchasing curriculum from a trusted source, expanding your in-school or your childcare programming to promote food literacy for children through gardening, cooking, taste tests, and more. We've seen a lot of success, certainly with getting more students out to the school gardens, and taste tests are very popular. Mass Farm to School will be hosting a webinar later this fall about how to host a Taste Test 101. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in doing field trips and you have identified a farm, but you need help covering the costs of, the transportation, et cetera, to a farm or a food producer in your region, that certainly would be an eligible activity. Expanding the before after school programming that supports food literacy, like an after school cooking club, that could be something that is offered. We've also seen child and parent cooking clubs happening in some locations. We have loved seeing the proposals that include professional development and training for educators. There have been a number where the funds for Mass Fresh have really gone to providing more PD opportunities for educators so that they're bringing these hands-on experiences to students, or, stories and literacy elements focused around gardening or cooking, or cultural relevancy in what we're making and serving to each other through their classrooms. And we also, this grant program will also cover PD costs and training for school nutrition professionals, so that school nutrition professionals can integrate more local, unprocessed, or minimally processed ingredients into the meal programs. So with that, I will turn it over to Maggie, who is going to talk to you all a little bit about GEMS.
Thanks, Abby. I know that there are a number of different folks on the call today, some with loads of GEMS experience and some that have probably never heard this term at all. And to reintroduce myself again, I'm Maggie Nowak, and I work for DESE's Office for Food Nutrition. So this grant opportunity, I'll flag, Abby's given kind of a fabulous wide array of examples of the many things that this grant has funded in the past 2 years since its inception. So there's probably a lot of folks on this call from many different departments and programs. Because this program is run through the Office for Food Nutrition, we do prioritize and want to think about the ways that it connects with your school meal programs, which is what is also the reason why the eligibility is as it is. And you'll see some of the grant questions are also intersecting with information about your school food program. But as I said, for folks who are very experienced in GEMS, I hope you'll bear with us for a moment, because I do want to address the folks in the room who maybe are a little bit new to this platform. So GEMS is DESE's new cloud-based financial and program management grant system. It's phased out Ed grants, which perhaps many of you are familiar with in the past, which is the way that this grant program was executed last year, as well as with a paper application that you emailed to me. And I am very excited that that is being replaced by the GEMS system to streamline this process. If you are in the Office for Food and Nutrition and this term GEMS and process is brand new, please know that it is not unique to the Mass Fresh grant. We will be rolling out all Office for Food and Nutrition grants in the 2024-2025 school years in GEMS. So please know that this is a system that you'll have to get used to. So might as well start now with Mass Fresh if you're interested in applying. A couple things to know about GEMS is that there is the capacity within GEMS to have multiple logins for a number of different folks in your school or district. And to have access to the application, you will want to gain your own personal login to GEMS, and you will need to be assigned a specific role. And in most cases, that's a grant writer role. So a majority of schools and school districts at this point in Massachusetts already have a GEMS account. You will probably want to reach out to the department or individual in your school who oversees grants and finances. They will be more than likely to identify that lead person who has access to GEMS at your district or school. And this person is probably something called a Universal Access Administrator in GEMS. And Abby, looks like we lost the screen. Oh, it's back. Great. You're good.
Sorry, pulling up the links that we'll be adding to the chat. I realized I didn't have those, so forgive me for pausing the screen.
No worries. And so your your user access administrator is the individual in GEMS that can give you access to GEMS as an individual. So if you're new to GEMS and you don't have your own GEMS login, you will need one. This is something that that individual at your district can provide you. And it's really important to note that in addition to creating a login, they will also need to assign you the role of grant writer to this specific grant. If we have a chance, I will do a live kind of demonstration of navigating GEMS for those who might be new, but I have already gotten a few questions of, getting a GEMS login, but still not seeing the grant application. Your user access administrator does need to take that second step of assigning you the role of grant writer to the grant for you to be able to view it. All right, next step. Going to see some lovely screenshots of GEMS. So this is the portal in and of itself, and the 3 steps to logging in once you do have that login and you have been assigned a role is you'll go to the upper right screen of GEMS and you'll log in with your username and password. You'll then search in the left navigation bar. Under search, you'll select funding applications. And you'll specifically need to make sure that when you get to screen 3, under step 3 on this slide, that you are in fiscal year 2025 and that the funding code is 0710. And it, as Abby said, is the Farming Reinforces Education and Student Health Grant. These are if you want to stay on that slide for a second, in the searching funding applications, if you should be able to keep all of these fields otherwise the same as you see on this slide. You shouldn't have to add your organization or number. It's really about ensuring the fiscal year and the application is correct. And you'll select application status all grants, and that should pull up your grant application that you can fill out if you'd like to apply. Next slide, please. So there are 3 main components of the application. There's a required program detailed section that asks some initial information, but is not scored as part of the grant. Then there are required grant questions that are scored, as well as a budget that is required. We are going to be reviewing a few of those sections today. They are all very well outlined in GEMS itself with clear directions on how to complete them. And the highlighted sections are what we'll cover today. But if you have any additional questions, you can certainly email me about the application. And last but not least, the application is going to be scored for everybody out of 100 points. Next slide, please. So if you haven't been in GEMS before, this is just a couple of clips of what, this is going to look like. It is a pretty straightforward user platform. There are tables like the one above where you can fill in different components or aspects of the table. There's also yes or no questions that are button dials. There are full response questions that will give you a number of characters to respond to the question. So these are the different ways you're going to be navigating and completing your application, as opposed to a Word document where you're putting in all of your information based on required questions. Next slide, please. Great. So wanted to highlight the first section of the application after some of those initial questions that are unscored is information about your child nutrition program. You will want your support of your school nutrition program and director to complete this section. And we'll be asking questions including your sponsor agreement number, information about what schools you plan to have activities for Mass Fresh occurring at, and what kind of meal service they offer. We'll be asking a little bit more detail about your meal participation in the last school year, as well as a little bit more about your school nutrition programs model for service and for preparation. We'll also lastly be asking a little bit more about the farm to school activities that you've had in the past, so that we have an understanding of where your program is starting off from. Next slide. Great. And the project description, this is your first chance to introduce your project to the reviewer and the application. One thing to highlight is, as Abby already mentioned, we are looking to fund projects that are starting new activity. So that may be that your programming is expanding to a new school. It may be that you're adding a new aspect to the 3 C's of what you do, or it may be that you are completely new to farm to school and that everything that you are proposing here is going to be something brand new for your community. Additionally, strong project descriptions are going to integrate your educational activities and opportunities with the exposure of food, local food, served as part of a child nutrition program. So as the Office for Food Nutrition being the one executing this grant, we are really excited and hoping to elevate those projects that really have some clear through line between the educational component happening in the community or in the classroom with the lived experience of students who are selecting meals every day in their cafeteria and getting to make choices about their actual food and hopefully local food. Next slide, please. All right, the project work plan. So this is something that we introduced as part of the application last year, and it is very similar other than, the visual work plan in and of itself looks a little different in GEMS, but it has the same required fields. We are requesting that, and this will be on the next slide, the work plan is going to highlight 3 goals that you have for your Mass Fresh project. And under each goal, we expect you to add the activities that will be involved in accomplishing that goal. So you'll see here, there's an example of a goal and one activity underneath it. We do expect each goal to have at least one activity, if not more. And we do ask that every additional column has the required information filled out. We have tried to make it a bit easier this year by providing drop downs for 4 of those 7 sections. So you'll see every arrow corresponds with a column that does have a drop down selection for you to select what's most applicable. But the activity and the target and the responsible party you're going to add to the table itself. Next slide, please. So again, please make sure you want to include at least 3 goals in your grant application, and each goal should have at least one, associated activity, if not more. And you'll see at the top here, and if you go to the application itself, this will also be clear. This section is the most heavily scored section of the grant. It is where we are really looking to understand what you're going to accomplish with the funds you're awarded and the actual on-the-ground activities that you are planning to execute and what impact they're going to have. So please, really do your due diligence to fill out in detail this section and make sure it really encompasses your vision for your project. Next slide, please. Great. Letter of support. So this was, I believe, an optional section for our grant last year. So this is a change. We are asking that every applicant is submitting a letter of support, at least one. You can submit up to 2, and no more than 2 letters of support will be scored. And the letter of support should address the applicant's ability to successfully complete the project activities that you talked about in your work plan. The letter of support should also talk about the benefit of the project and have some awareness of who the applicant is and that they have the ability to accomplish these goals. And then if the letter of support is coming from an organization or individual who will also have a role in the project, which does not have to be the case for your letter of support, but if they do, we want that to be mentioned as well in the narrative. Letters of support can be up to 2 pages, and the scoring for the letter of support is going to be based on the content, not the quantity of the letter of supports, nor the, title of the individual submitting the report. And I'll give a couple examples in a second of who might submit a letter of support. But we really will be scoring these letters based on their ability to address the 3 points that I made earlier about your project. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there may be folks who are going to be paying contractors or nonprofit partners to do work as part of your Mass Fresh grant. I believe Mashpee Public Schools is a great example of that. They worked with some contracted partners for some of their garden builds, as did a number of schools like Boston Public Schools, worked with great nonprofit food system partners. If you are going to be working with a nonprofit food system partner or any contractor in your grant, we do require that they have a letter of support as one of those letters of support that you submit. And any contracted partner, if you have more than one, should be submitting this letter. So to simplify things, if you have more than 2 contractors who are going to be working on your project, you will need to email me any additional letters of support because the required field only allows you to upload 2 letters. And again, this is only applicable to contracted paid partners that are going to appear in your budget. You by no means have to have contracted paid partners to have the successful and funded MassFresh grant. But we do ask that they provide a letter of support if they're written into the budget, just so that we understand that you've confirmed with them that they can indeed do the work that you've laid out for them in the project proposal, and that they have an understanding that you're relying on their support to complete the project. And then last is a little brainstorm on the sheet on this slide, excuse me, of the folks that you might have submit a letter of support. It might be someone in another department from your own who's going to be collaborating, cross-curricular collaboration on the project. It could be a community partner. It could be a local farm that you source food from, or that perhaps you are going to take a farm visit to. It could be your school committee, a parent volunteer in the garden. It could be a legislator. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means. We do ask that the letter of support come from outside of the group of folks that are submitting your application. So if you are a food service director that is submitting this application or writing this application, we would not expect that your food service department is writing a letter of support. But if you plan to partner with the English department to do something in the realm of reading and literacy, it would be completely appropriate for your English coordinator or English curricular director to write a letter of support as an example. Next slide, please. Great. And then lastly, the budget. So the budget in terms of content is standardized across all GEMS grants and is pretty similar to the Excel that you formally filled out when we were in Ed grants. Similar to that structure last year, you're going to be filling out different object codes, basically different categories of what you would like funded. And you'll see here a couple screenshots in GEMS. The first screenshot, when you enter the budget section of the application, is going to give you the different types of categories that you would be requesting funds for. And when you select the modify that's highlighted, you then have the opportunity to add a budget detail, which is that second on the right picture screenshot and the circled hyperlink that is on that page. The third slide in a moment will show you what, when you press on that, it'll look like. But basically, you're going to be adding all of your budget details through that mechanism in each category. At the top of the budget on the main page, it is going to automatically calculate the indirect cost rate that is available for you to apply to this grant. You do not need to include, you're not required by any means to include indirect cost in your budget. That is a district and applicant by applicant decision, but it will automatically calculate for you the maximum allowed amount for indirect costs. Last but not least, the budget should only include the purchase of items or services that will be received or rendered by June 30th, 2025. So no further activity for this grant can exceed that timeline. So please plan accordingly when you're building out your budget. Next slide, please, Abby. Great. And so when you press on that add budget detail, you're going to get to this slide. And you'll see in the red boxes the areas that you're going to need to fill out. So the object code and function code, as well as the quantity and cost, of the item. And then the narrative description is really a very, very brief statement about what it is that you're actually purchasing or funding with that category in that line. There is a resource on the GEMS homepage under DESE resources that gives a little bit more detail about what the different object codes and function codes correspond to. So if you need a little bit more guidance on what to select for those categories, there is a full chart available. It's called the GEMS Chart of Accounts Guidance and Crosswalk. And if you need any help accessing that, please let me know. And I do want to highlight, because we've seen challenges with this in the past, this budget is a specific section within the grant, but under the required grants question section, you're going to see a budget narrative. And these two things are separate. So the narrative that you're going to fill out in your budget, if you remember back to our Ed Grants days when we had an Excel, that really translates to that small column on the right that is literally where you put what you were purchasing or what services you were providing. And that is exactly what this narrative box is serving the purpose of in the budget section of the grant. For the budget narrative, which is part of the questions component of the application, we expect applicants to close the gap between what is being purchased and how it relates to your work plan. So how does purchasing 4 shovels meet the activity that you have in your work plan for your project? So you are required to fill out both of those sections, the narrative description and the budget, and the budget narrative, which you'll see in a second is a table that you're going to fill out. Next slide, please. Perfect. So again, this is visually what the budget narrative is going to look like in the required grants question section. And it is meant to really correspond to your budget. So one thing I might suggest is that you complete your budget first, then perhaps print it out or have it accessible and go through it when you complete your budget narrative in this section, and make sure each of your items align with a corresponding row on the budget narrative. And you can, it's meant to be a pretty quick reference. So you're going to use that project work plan we talked about earlier with the activities and goals. You're going to reference that directly about the purchase that you're making. And then any other brief additional notes that you might want to add explaining that connection between the purchase, service, or item and the goal that you're going to accomplish with that item. Great. Awesome. And then some additional reminders or high level just takeaways. So unallowable costs. So while food can be purchased with the grant, the food cannot be served as part of a reimbursable meal in school breakfast or the National School Lunch Program, snack program, etc. And it can't be sold as a competitive food or beverage or as part of a fundraiser. So some allowable purchases of food might be as ingredients for a staff training or for a after-school cooking club, but the actual funding of food for your school meal programs is not allowable. Additionally, as we said a few times, this funding is meant for new activities and not to fund existing programming that already has a funding source or has already been in existence. And then some tips for GEMS navigation, and it looks like we might have a few minutes to be able to test it out, to do a test drive in GEMS itself. But as I mentioned, the indirect costs will automatically calculate for you, but just because that box is calculating doesn't mean it's part of your grant budget unless you add it yourself. So that is completely up to you whether or not you want to include it in your budget. You will be prompted in 2 different sections of GEMS to upload your letters of support. You should only need to do so in one place. So if you can avoid it, please just add it in the first section where you're prompted to add your letter of support. It's not a problem if it's duplicative. Ultimately, we want to make sure you get your letters of support in. It's just a functionality of GEMS that we're trying to work through. But once you upload your letters of support, ideally in the required grants question section, you should be able to leave the additional related document section blank. And I'll show you what that looks like in GEMS in a moment. The last question I've heard for some folks is, can I work through this grant or start to draft my answers outside of GEMS? And I might be working with a team to do that. And there is a way to print the application questions in GEMS. I will warn you that it is going to print the page as it appears. It's not going to be a clean, separate PDF of just the actual text, but you are able to print the questions with your own access through a column on the right of the application, and it says print, so you can print any of the sections. All right, next slide. Great. And then a very important piece to note about the submission of your grant. So there are 3 individuals that are required to sign off on your grant before it is considered submitted to DESE. And that submission has to be completed by all 3 individuals by the grant deadline, which is October 11th at 5 p.m. It's a Friday. If it is only through 1 or 2 of these individuals and not through your superintendent or chief executive, we cannot score your grant and it will not be accepted. And there are no exceptions. So this process is mirroring the former process where we had a Part 1 standard contract form. You might all remember potentially physically having to run around and get people to have wet signatures on a piece of paper. Hopefully this process through GEMS for all of DESE is streamlining that process. It is a electronic sign-off for each of these individuals at this access level, but all 3 of these approvals have to have occurred before the deadline for your application to be considered submitted. You should be able to see the level of submission within GEMS. This will appear with your access, so you can check as you move your grant to the next step where it is in the approval process. But please make sure on October 11th that you see that the LEA superintendent has approved and submitted your grant to know that it can be considered. Next slide, please. Great. So this is the landing page for the RFP. It really summarizes a lot of the information we just shared, and I'll go ahead and throw that in the chat as well. All of the eligibility information and priority areas, etc., and grant instructions are included on this page, and you should just see it in the chat now. Next slide, Abby. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the exception of any additional letters of support you might need to provide for contracted partners, all of the application submission is happening in GEMS. So there's no emailed application or additional materials going to me or anyone else at DESE. If you do have questions after this webinar about the grant, you're welcome to email me, but all questions do need to be submitted no later than October 4th. And all of the questions and answers will be documented and provided in the grant Q&A link. And Abby, if you have a chance to grab that link and add it, that would be great. We are updating this constantly, on a daily, weekly basis with any questions that have come through about the grant. So if you're looking for any guidance, before you reach out with your own question, I would check the Q&A to make sure it hasn't already been asked and that you can't already get your question answered. Great. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Abby. So I'm just going to check. It looks like we just have a few questions in the chat right now. And if folks have more, please add them. But I think we do have a few minutes to do a navigation in GEMS. What do you think, Abby? Go for it. Awesome. Cool. Okay, great, guys. I'm going to share screen. And again, my apologies. I'm sure we have some veteran GEM folks on this call. I will voice that this is the, oops, let's see. All right, let me try that one more time. Abby, do you mind confirming that you see the GEMS website? Okay, perfect. Great.
Yes.
So I'll voice just briefly, this is the Office for Food and Nutrition's first grant in GEMS. We're pioneering the way, and so there may be hiccups. So as you go to apply and use this system potentially for the 30th time or for the first time, if you are reaching any challenges or the access or questions I described are not appearing the same way as I indicated here, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We appreciate this for everyone as a learning process in this new system. There may be hiccups and kinks, and we are, going to work through them together as we make sure everyone has equitable access to applying for the grant and getting their application submitted by the required deadline. So this is the GEMS homepage here. I am already logged in, as you'll see, but you will log in on the right-hand side here, and you'll see your initials. You're going to look for a grant, and again, you have to have a personal login and an assigned role within grants to be able to see a grant. You're going to go to search and then funding applications. Great, and then you have the search function here. The only thing that we need to add here is the grant title itself, and it's funding code 710. You're going to select that it's all, if the status is all, and you'll see here, I'm seeing, because of my availability, all of the school districts who are eligible to apply, and I'm going to go ahead and pick on Abby Kelly Foster to show you guys what the system looks like. But when you press search, you're just going to see your school or district listed. You'll see in this table, as I mentioned, you're going to see the status that the grant is currently at. And this is where you will see whether or not the grant writer yourself has submitted the grant, whether the fiscal representative has approved the grant, and whether the superintendent or chief executive has also made approval. So this status will be that section you want to check with your colleagues to make sure your submission is all the way submitted by the deadline. We click into the grant here. You're going to see some information here that you may or may not need to utilize at this point. This is for folks typically who have been funded. These categories are more helpful, but the actual application itself lives here. So the required program details, the questions. This is the letter of support link I mentioned that you shouldn't have to use, and then the budget. So these three, the first, second, and fourth, are really those sections with the required grant information you're going to fill out. And you'll see all the way to the right your capacity to print those sections if you want to access them offline. When you go ahead to actually start completing those sections, you will need to go to the top and press application started. I'm going to go ahead and do that. If Abby Kelly Foster is on the call, don't you worry, I will not mess up your status. So once you select, that you are your application is started, you're going to go ahead into each of these sections and complete the required information. So this is the questionnaire that I mentioned that's required but unscored, as well as some contact information and a grant's commitment attestation. To go back, you can either press sections, which will get you back to the main page, or you can go to next page, which will take us to our required questions. These are all of the required questions we covered today in the presentation, so I'm largely going to scroll down, but you will see that in each category, you either have a multiple choice, or these squares represent check boxes where you can select multiple selections. There are some questions that correspond specifically with numbers, like this question about participation, so you will only be able to enter a number into this field. And then you're going to see down below here these larger fields for your narrative, as well as the way that this table appears for the work plan. So as I think I mentioned earlier, it's not quite as clean as before when we had our Word document table, but it functions the exact same. You'll see an example up here to guide you, and you'll put your goals in these bigger boxes. And below, you'll be able to add each individual activity and select your options in the drawdown where relevant. All of these sections for each activity should be completed. And if you want to add another activity beyond just one under a goal, you're going to select Add Row. An additional row will appear. There's no limit on the number of rows that you select, and you are able to delete them if you no longer need them. But for each goal, please do, again, ensure that you have at least one activity that corresponds with you meeting this goal. Scrolling down a little bit further, you'll see another table. This is the section related to your letter of support. You'll see here under the directions for the letter of support, you'll have an upload link where you will be prompted to upload your letter of support. It should allow you to upload up to 2 separate documents, and I believe they need to be in PDF form. But if folks have any issues with that, please reach out. And once they are uploaded here, you will see them listed in this table. And if they are not uploading successfully in this table, please do feel free to go back to the main section and utilize this instead related documents letter of support link, which will prompt you to do the same thing. You only need to upload your letters of support in one place. If you would like additional peace of mind, you can upload to both sections, but please just limit your letters of support to 2 from 2 entities. That's the only those are the only letters, excuse me, that will be scored. Quickly, lastly, we'll see if I missed anything else of particular interest here in GEMS. And then that last section, as I mentioned, is your budget narrative. And as is the case for your work plan, you can also add rows. So once you finish your budget, you can probably, it will be best to go back then and complete your budget narrative so that they correspond. All right, sections. The last thing I'll showcase here is just the budget. So again, you're going to be filling out this budget, but the budget overview is just a way to view the same information. It is not something to fill out. You're just going to fill out this section titled budget. And as you saw through the screenshots, you're prompted to, put your request in one of these 8 categories here. And if you were to go into equipment, for example, and select modify, you can then give the further detail through add budget detail about what you plan on purchasing in terms of equipment. And these drop downs are available for you to select what they fall under. All right, so that was a fast and furious walkthrough of GEMS, and thank you for the probably veterans in the room who have even more tips and tricks to share about navigating the GEMS platform. I'm going to stop sharing for a second here, and I think I'm ready to kick it back to you, Abby.
Great. Well, we are closing out our presentation for today, which will allow us a little bit more time for Q&A. So as a review, we do have most of these links have already been put into the chat. I'll put one more in, and that's for we have the MassFresh grant application, the MassFresh Q&A. Those are already in the chat. We have a variety of grant resources on the Mass Farm to School website. If you're looking for a community partner or maybe an organization that you might be able to partner with to do some of your the garden-based educational programming or work with your school kitchen teams, you can check out the MassFresh grant resources. We do offer our Harvest of the Month program that you can still enroll in, both for educators and for food service. And there's the professional development calendar that is updated for this upcoming school year. What I would also say is that we are providing, as in previous years, mini coaching sessions to prospective grant applicants. So if you are looking to kind of mull through your MassFresh pitch, if you will, or looking for how to hone in your application, feel free to schedule a time using either the QR code on the screen before you or by signing up using the Calendly link that I just put into the chat. So those are a couple of options for folks as well. I would say, certainly if you have questions, get in touch. And we can look through what's coming in on the Q&A. Maggie, did I miss anything? What else did we?
I don't think so. I think we're good. I have a couple of questions that have come through with the Q&A. If you have any more, please feel to add them, and please do use that Q&A function so that we can save these for the written Q&A for the website if you have any. But a question about the rubric: do you have any criteria or rubric available for the application submission? So the application rubric that is provided is the score quantity for each section, and that is written directly into GEMS, and the score will correspond with the quality of response to each question in the application. And then how many schools were awarded last year, and what was the average award? That's a great question. We did have 23 schools and early education programs, so combined, we had 23 awardees last year. I will say that the funding cap and the time frame of the funding has really changed, so that number of awardees doesn't necessarily, might not track to what happens this year, because we are now going to have just a one-year grant cycle. And the award cap is a little bit smaller, given that it's a shorter time frame to spend your funds. So instead of $50,000, which was last year's funding cap, folks can apply to up to $30,000. All right, I think that's all the questions I see. Oh, I see another one come in. Great. And then we have a question here around timeline. So it is certainly hard to estimate when exactly funds will be available to grantees. We have initiated this grant process a bit earlier than last year with the hope of getting funds out in winter 2025. So we do hope by the new year, by January, February, that the grants will be available and grants will be awarded and grant funding will be available. But it is an administrative process that does require a number of different steps. So it will be hard to fully confirm that until we are well within the award process. Great. And then we have a question regarding whether the fiscal person and the executive person within GEMS can be the same person. That is a great question. That is a good one for our Jesse Grants management team. I will say that best practice is that the fiscal representative, which I think you're referring to, and the chief executive are two distinct different individuals, and that's just to ensure that funds are being responsibly allocated and considered, and so that there's a check and balance in your application. So I do believe that is the policy within GEMS at this time. But when you are setting up your GEMS application, that is ultimately at the discretion of your district of who is in charge of each role at the district or school level. Any other questions? Well, we're so thrilled that there's a number of folks interested in this grant, and we hope that if questions arise as you get a chance to look at the RFP and the application, that you'll send us a message or sign up for Mass Farm to Schools coaching sessions. We will stay on for a few more minutes if there are any other questions that arise, and these will be shared out in the Q&A section, and the slides and the recording will be made available on Mass Farm to Schools website. But thank you all so much for coming and joining us today to hear about the grant.
Thank you. Looks like participation's dwindling. So
I did see another, I saw another question in the chat really quick, Abby, and just about previous awardees. And I believe I'll just repost the link, but we do have descriptions of all former awardees available on the DESE website. These descriptions are quite short. Mass Farm to School is continuously developing grant reports on grantees that are a little bit more extensive, and I believe that the first year of grant funded awardees can be read about and viewed in a report on Mass Farm to School's website. And the last year's grantees, more information will be forthcoming. But I just put in the the chat here a link to the Mass Fresh awardee descriptions, the brief descriptions.
And Mass Farm to School, our existing available descriptions of different grantees can be accessed on the I will repost it again, but our web page for Mass Fresh on our website. So
Great. I do see a hand raised. I will say if you're able to throw your question in the chat, that helps us with documentation for the grant for the Q&A section. So if you are able to type your question in, we're thrilled to answer it in the Q&A.
I do see the individual who has raised their hand, and if you're not able to reach out to the chat right now, I'll try to email you to see what your question is and how we can respond to it.
Thanks, Abby.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we've wrapped up. Feel free to contact us if anything else arises, but best of luck and thank you so much for your interest in the grant.
Thank you all.